My name is Sienna Reed, and 5 years ago, my mother called me 3 days before Thanksgiving to deliver a 7-word sentence that effectively erased my existence. Don't come home. Brianna needs her space. No explanation, no apology, just the sound of a door slamming shut on 30 years of trying to be good enough for a family that saw me as an inconvenience. I spent that holiday in a rainy Chicago diner, choking on a lukewarm turkey club while my biological family celebrated their perfect life without me. I had no clue the strangers at the next booth would one day walk me down the aisle while my birth parents stood outside the gates, begging for a glance. If you've ever been the family scapegoat, hit that like and subscribe button right now. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let's go back to the phone call that shattered my world. It was November 21st. I was in my cramped studio in Chicago, surrounded by half-packed bags and the smell of a cheap candle I'd lit to feel festive. I'd already dropped $800 on a non-refundable flight to Seattle. When my mom's name flashed on the screen, I actually smiled. "Hey, Mom, I'm almost packed," I said, but her voice was a sheet of ice. "Sienna, listen, don't come home this year. Brianna is pregnant with her second, and she's extremely high stress. We don't need any of your drama." I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white. Drama? I hadn't spoken to my sister in 6 months. I was being exiled from my own childhood home for a drama that didn't even exist yet. "Mom, I literally just asked her why I wasn't invited to the gender reveal," I whispered, my voice cracking. "That's not drama. That's me wondering why I'm being treated like a stranger." My mother didn't care. "See, everything is always about you, Sienna. Just get a refund on your ticket. Brianna is the priority right now. You understand." Then the line went dead. I stood there watching the Chicago sleet hit my window, realizing I was 30 years old and still the acceptable sacrifice. This wasn't the first time. It started when I was 10 and they forgot my dance recital because Brianna had a hangnail. It continued at my high school graduation when they arrived 2 hours late because Brianna felt bloated. I was the honor student, the quiet one, the one who never asked for anything. My sister, Brianna, was the golden child of Seattle. She didn't just have a life, she had a production. On my 16th birthday, I'd planned a small bonfire with my 2 best friends. My parents promised we'd have s'mores and music, but that morning, Brianna fake fainted because her boyfriend broke up with her. My party was canceled so the entire house could focus on Brianna's mental health. I spent my 16th birthday making her tea while she smirked at me behind my mother's back. "Don't be so sensitive, Sienna. Why can't you just be happy that your sister is recovering?" I learned very early that if I wanted to survive in that house, I had to become invisible. I thought if I was small enough, they might finally have room for me. I was wrong. Desperate, I called my father. I thought just once he might stand up for me. The phone rang forever. When he finally picked up, I could hear the football game roaring in the background. "Dad, did Mom tell you I'm not allowed to come home for Thanksgiving?" There was a long, heavy silence. I could almost see him rubbing his face in that recliner he loved more than his own daughters. "She mentioned it, kiddo. Look, you know how your mother is. She's just trying to keep the peace." I felt something inside me snap. By excluding me? "Dad, do you even want me there?" 10 seconds passed, then 15. "I think it's better if you just listen to your mother this year," he finally muttered. He didn't even say goodbye before hanging up. He chose silence, which was just a louder way of choosing them. Thanksgiving morning arrived gray and bitter. I woke up to the sound of my neighbors upstairs laughing, the smell of their turkey wafting through the vents. My phone was a graveyard. No texts, no happy Thanksgiving from my parents. Around noon, I made the mistake of opening Instagram. There it was, a high-definition photo of the Reed family around a massive mahogany table. Mom, Dad, Brianna, and her husband all wearing matching sweaters. The caption read, "Grateful for my whole world, the only people who truly matter." I zoomed in. 5 chairs, 4 adults, 1 toddler. They hadn't just told me not to come, they hadn't even left a space for me. I was erased from the family portrait, as if I'd never been born. That was the moment I stopped crying and started planning. I wasn't going to sit in my dark apartment and rot. If I was the dramatic daughter, I was going to be dramatic in style. I threw on my best coat and headed to the Gilded Anchor, a legendary Chicago steakhouse that stayed open for the holidays. It was the kind of place with velvet booths and waiters who treated you like royalty. When I walked in, the warmth hit me, along with the smell of roasted rosemary and expensive wine. The hostess looked at me with that pity eyes look people give solo diners on holidays. "Just one?" she asked. "Just one," I replied, standing tall. She led me to a tiny table wedged right next to a massive, boisterous family that looked like they walked out of a luxury magazine. I didn't know it yet, but that table was my destiny. The family next to me was pure chaos, the good kind. 3 generations of people laughing, interrupting each other, and passing plates of lobster mac and cheese. An elegant woman with silver hair sat at the head, watching her kids with so much pride it made my chest ache. I tried to focus on my menu, but the contrast was too much. While my own father couldn't even say he wanted me at his table, these strangers were celebrating like the world was ending tomorrow. My food arrived, a perfect turkey dinner, but it tasted like ash. I looked at the empty chair across from me and realized that for 27 years, I'd been starving for a love that was never on the menu. A single tear escaped and hit my silk napkin. I tried to hide, but I was failing. "Sweetheart, are you all right?" A voice like warm honey broke through my spiral. I looked up to see the silver-haired matriarch from the next table standing over me. Her eyes weren't full of pity, they were full of recognition. "I'm fine," I lied, wiping my eyes. "Just the onions in the stuffing." She raised a perfectly groomed eyebrow and smiled. "Onions don't usually break hearts on Thanksgiving, dear. I'm Clara Montgomery." I managed a small, shaky smile. "I'm Sienna." Clara looked at her family, then back at me with a look of absolute steel. "No one should spend this day in the company of ghosts, Sienna. My husband tells dad jokes, and my son Leo is currently losing a debate about architecture. Come suffer with us." She didn't wait for a no, she just took my hand. I stood up on shaky legs and joined the Montgomery table. In an instant, a glass of vintage champagne was in my hand and a warm roll was on my plate. They didn't treat me like a stranger. They treated me like a long-lost cousin. Julian, the father, shook my hand firmly, and Leo, the son, gave me a wink that made my heart do a flip back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking. I was being heard. But as the wine flowed, Clara leaned in and asked the question that would change everything. "Why are you really here alone, Sienna?" When I told her the truth about the Reeds, her face went cold. "Well," she whispered, "if they don't want you, we'll just have to keep you. Stick around for part 2 because the revenge is about to get legal." As the plates were cleared, Clara leaned in closely. "Can I tell you a secret, Sienna?" she asked, her voice dropping. "I spent 35 years as a cutthroat family law attorney here in Chicago. I practically choked on my wine." Clara smiled, a knowing, dangerous smile. "I've seen every flavor of toxic family dynamics. People who label you as drama are usually the ones orchestrating it. They just need a convenient scapegoat so they don't have to look at their own miserable reflections." The words hit me like a freight train. For 3 decades, I had carried the crushing weight of my family's dysfunction. Clara placed her diamond-ringed hand over mine. "You are not the problem, sweetheart. You never were." I couldn't breathe. Those were the exact words I had starved for my entire life, delivered by a total stranger. When the check finally arrived, Julian snatched it away before I could even reach for my purse. "Absolutely not," he boomed cheerfully. "Montgomery tradition. We always pay for unexpected, delightful guests." As we bundled up in our winter coats to face the freezing Chicago wind, Clara pressed something into my palm. It was a thick, cream-colored business card with embossed gold lettering, Clara Montgomery, J.D., Family Law. Underneath was a private number and an address in the affluent Gold Coast neighborhood. "If you ever need to talk, call me," she insisted, her eyes locking onto mine. "And Sunday dinners are mandatory at our house. Don't make me subpoena you." I stood on the snowy pavement clutching that small piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. I had absolutely no idea I held the literal keys to my future. I didn't go the first week, or the second. It felt insane to crash a wealthy family's Sunday dinner just because they felt sorry for me. But Clara kept texting, refusing to let me slip back into the shadows. By mid-December, I finally caved. I stood outside their massive, gorgeous brownstone for 10 solid minutes, terrified. But before I could even knock, the heavy oak door swung open. Clara pulled me into a fierce, perfume-scented hug like I was a soldier returning from war. "We saved your seat," she declared. The house was a chaotic wonderland of roaring fireplaces, laughing kids, and the smell of roasting garlic. It looked exactly like the kind of place where miracles happened. I sat at that giant table surrounded by warmth, and for the very first time in my existence, I actually felt like I was allowed to take up space. Over the next 6 months, I became a permanent fixture at the Montgomery house. Julian taught me how to play aggressive, high-stakes poker, laughing every time I completely bluffed him out of his chips. Clara shared her highly classified, generations-old recipe for the perfect beef Wellington, and Leo became my absolute best friend. We were the kind of friends who texted absurd memes at 3 in the morning and debated terribly cheesy horror movies until the sun came up. He saw me, the real, unfiltered me, and he never asked me to be quieter or smaller. Meanwhile, not a single text came from my biological family. The Reeds had completely ghosted me. But the shocking truth was, I didn't care anymore. I wasn't performing for scraps of toxic love. I was finally breathing. I was finally, truly, unconditionally loved. One crisp spring afternoon, Clara and I were lounging on her beautiful patio, watching the hydrangeas bloom. "Have you heard from the Reeds at all?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. "No," I replied, tracing the rim of my teacup. "And I don't feel guilty about it anymore. People say blood is thicker than water, but that's a lie used to trap you." Clara smiled that sharp, brilliant lawyer smile. In my career, I helped hundreds of people secure legal recognition for the families they actively built, not the toxic ones they were unfortunately born into. She paused, letting the heavy implication hang in the air. "The law recognizes what the heart already knows, Sienna. Family is created, and there are very official ways to make those bonds permanent." I didn't fully grasp her meaning yet, but the seed was beautifully planted. Let's hit the pause button right here, guys. If you are watching this and you have ever been guilt-tripped by toxic relatives using the "but we're family" excuse, I want you to completely smash that like button right now. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to protect your own mental health and peace? I want to read your stories, so drop a massive comment down below. It helps the algorithm push this video to other people who desperately need to hear this message of survival and hope. Make sure you are subscribed with those notifications turned all the way on, because this revenge story is about to shift into high gear. You are not going to want to miss the absolutely insane legal loophole we pull on my biological parents. All right, let's get right back into the wild family drama and romance. 2 years after that fateful Thanksgiving, things shifted. Leo and I weren't just best friends anymore. The late-night texts had turned into lingering touches, and our movie nights felt increasingly electric. It didn't feel like a sudden spark. It felt like waking up and realizing the sun had been shining on me the entire time. One evening, Leo asked me to get dressed up for a fancy dinner. When the Uber pulled up, my jaw completely dropped. We were standing right outside the Gilded Anchor, the exact same steakhouse where we first met. "This feels extremely full circle, Montgomery," I teased, sliding into the plush velvet booth. "That is precisely the point, Sienna," Leo replied, looking suddenly incredibly nervous. He kept adjusting his silk tie and clearing his throat. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Something massive was happening. The restaurant was humming with energy, but all I could hear was the rush of blood in my ears. Leo reached across the white tablecloth and took both of my hands in his. "Sienna, I have been trying to figure out how to do this flawlessly for 6 months. I know your biological family destroyed your trust. I know you're terrified of being abandoned by the people who are supposed to protect you, but I am not them. I am never, ever going to leave you." He held my gaze, his dark eyes fierce and determined. "I want to spend the rest of my life choosing you, every single day, first, completely, and without any conditions." He smoothly slid out of the booth and dropped to one knee, right there in the middle of the crowded, upscale restaurant. "Sienna Reed," Leo said softly, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the steakhouse. He pulled a small black velvet box from his jacket pocket and popped it open, revealing a breathtaking, custom-cut diamond. "Will you marry me?" I couldn't breathe. I looked at this incredible man who had been my sanctuary, my rock, and my absolute best friend through 2 years of intense trauma and healing. I saw my entire beautiful future looking right back at me. "Yes," I choked out, tears of pure joy spilling down my cheeks. "Yes, 1,000,000 times yes." He slipped the gorgeous ring onto my finger, and the entire restaurant erupted into wild applause. Diners were cheering and clinking their glasses. But as I looked up, I noticed a very familiar older couple sitting in a corner booth, popping a massive bottle of champagne. It was Clara and Julian. They were beaming with pride, totally in on the surprise. Clara completely insisted on being here. Leo laughed, wiping a tear from his own eye. I was officially going to become a Montgomery. We dove headfirst into extravagant wedding planning. We booked a stunning, sprawling vineyard estate and hired premium caterers. Everything was an absolute fairy tale. But one toxic cloud kept threatening to ruin my joy. The luxury wedding invitations required a specific line for the parents of the bride. I stared at the blank space for days. Robert and Linda Reed hadn't bothered to speak to me in over 2 years. They had discarded me like trash. I absolutely refused to print their names on my beautiful invitations. They hadn't earned that sacred honor. I had to make a drastic, unthinkable choice about my parents to fix this. I paced Clara's hardwood floors, agonizing over the invitations. Clara found me and gently asked what was troubling me. When I explained the blank parents of the bride line, she smiled that lethal, brilliant attorney smile. "Remember when I mentioned the law recognizes families that are actively created?" she asked softly. "There's a powerful legal process called adult adoption. It completely severs legal ties with toxic biological relatives and creates a brand new ironclad parent-child relationship. A new birth certificate, new next of kin, everything." My jaw hit the floor. I looked at this fierce woman. "Would you and Julian," I choked out. "We've considered you our daughter since day one," she whispered. The ultimate revenge wasn't screaming, it was erasing them forever. The adult adoption process was a blur of intense legal paperwork, courthouse appearances, and emotional filings. With Clara brutally navigating the legal system for me, it felt less like sterile bureaucracy and much more like a sacred healing ceremony. When the strict Chicago judge finally slammed his gavel and signed the binding order, I officially, legally became Sienna Montgomery. I held my brand new birth certificate in my trembling hands, completely reborn with parents who actually wanted me. Our spectacular June wedding was finally locked in. We aggressively mailed out hundreds of custom invitations with the line I had agonized over now proudly displaying the ultimate mic drop. Parents of the bride, Julian and Clara Montgomery. The explosive trap was set. Of course, in a gossipy city like Seattle, the Reed family inevitably found out. 3 months before the massive wedding, my phone aggressively buzzed with a shocking text from my golden child sister, Brianna. It was her very first message to me in nearly 3 years. "Did you seriously think I wouldn't find out you're getting married?" I stared at the toxic notification, laughed out loud, and instantly blocked her number. A week later, my mother's number lit up my phone 5 different times in a single panic-stricken day. I let every single call slide right to voicemail until she finally texted, "Why didn't you tell us? We are your family. Call me back immediately." I read it twice, absolutely disgusted by the sheer audacity. 3 solid years of treating me like a ghost, and now they demand access? No way. The Reeds refused to be ignored, and my mother escalated things to a terrifying level. She physically showed up uninvited at my secure Chicago apartment on a random Tuesday afternoon. I foolishly opened the door without checking the peephole, and there she stood, looking older and deeply furious. Without being asked, she shoved her way aggressively into my living space. "What on earth are you doing? Getting married without telling your own mother?" she shrieked. I closed my front door very slowly and maintained deadly eye contact. "We haven't spoken in 3 years. You told me not to come home," I replied. She wildly waved her hands. "That was just one Thanksgiving. You can't still be acting this dramatically over that." She still thought she could gaslight me into submission. My mother's frantic eyes darted around my apartment, locking onto a massive framed photo of the Montgomery family with me standing happily right in the center. "Who are these random people?" she demanded. I smiled coldly. "My family," I said, her face contorted with pure rage. "I am your family," she screamed. "You were," I corrected her firmly, "but you chose not to be because Brianna didn't want any drama." She aggressively demanded an invitation to the wedding. I walked over, ripped my front door open, and looked at her with zero emotion. "Absolutely not. You don't get to erase my entire existence and then demand a front row VIP seat at my table. Get out of my apartment," I ordered. If you're loving this boundary setting moment, hit that like button right now. The wedding day finally dawned, completely drenched in golden cinematic perfection. We were at a sprawling, breathtaking vineyard in Napa Valley. In the luxurious bridal suite, I stood before a massive mirror while Clara gently adjusted my designer veil. I wasn't the scared, rejected girl crying in a steakhouse anymore. I was untouchable, but I wasn't stupid either. Knowing my biological mother's unhinged behavior after our apartment confrontation, I had hired a heavy-duty private security team as a quiet precaution. Clara gripped my shoulders tightly. "Whatever happens today, remember you have a family who fiercely chose you. We will always choose you," she promised. I hugged her back with tears in my eyes and finally said the word I'd been holding on to. "I love you, Mom." The trap was officially primed. Looking out the window, I saw hundreds of guests taking their seats. Leo was already standing at the floral altar, looking impossibly handsome in his tailored suit. The ceremony was an absolute, undisputed dream. Julian walked me down the long, rose-covered aisle, his arms steady and his chest puffed out with massive pride. We exchanged highly emotional, handwritten vows that had half the audience openly sobbing into their luxury tissues. When Leo finally slipped the heavy diamond wedding band onto my finger and the officiant joyfully pronounced us husband and wife, I felt a massive tectonic shift in my soul. The deepest wounds of my childhood suddenly clicked shut. I had won. But the absolute best, most incredibly satisfying part of this revenge story was about to unfold at the lavish reception. The high-energy reception was vibrating with music and laughter when my lead security guard suddenly appeared discreetly at my elbow. "Mrs. Montgomery," he murmured professionally, "there are 2 individuals at the front entrance aggressively demanding entry. They are violently claiming to be your biological parents." I felt a wicked thrill shoot straight down my spine. I had been anticipating this exact moment all day. Leo immediately stepped in front of me, his jaw clenched tight. "I'll go handle this right now," he growled protectively. "No," I said, grabbing his hand with an absolutely terrifying smirk. "I am going to handle it." I wasn't going to hide. I was going to let them walk right into the most devastating, humiliating trap of their entire miserable lives. I quickly considered my options. I could have security physically throw them off the vineyard property. I could avoid the messy confrontation entirely. But my inner villain whispered something much more satisfying. Let them in. Let them witness exactly what they lost and see the powerful family who stepped up to claim their discarded daughter. "Let them in," I instructed the bulky security guard, "but do not seat them anywhere near the VIP family tables. Escort them to the very back of the room and make them stand." A few tense minutes later, I spotted Robert and Linda Reed standing awkwardly near the coat check, staring in absolute shock at the 100-plus guests celebrating the daughter they had thrown away like trash. They were completely clueless about the atomic bomb I was about to drop on them. The timing was chillingly perfect. As my biological parents stood in the shadows, craning their necks, the charismatic MC tapped the microphone, and the loud music completely cut out. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for a massive moment," he boomed across the silent room. "Before we continue, I'd like to introduce some very special people." I locked eyes with my mother from across the massive ballroom. She stood up a little straighter, a smug, entitled look washing over her face. She legitimately thought this was her grand moment, that I was going to publicly honor her after she crashed my wedding. Guys, the look on her face when the MC reads the real names is going to break the internet. Drop a Team Sienna in the comments right now if you are ready for this legendary petty revenge. Ladies and gentlemen, please stand for the official parents of the bride, Julian and Clara Montgomery. The room erupted into thunderous cheers and applause. My biological mother, Linda, actually took a physical step forward into the light, her mouth hanging open in a silent, confused scream. She looked around frantically, waiting for the MC to correct his mistake, but the spotlight stayed firmly on Clara and Julian as they walked toward the head table with their heads held high. I could see the exact second reality hit her like a physical blow. She wasn't the guest of honor. She was just a ghost at her own daughter's banquet. She looked at Robert, who was red-faced and clutching a chair for support. They were invisible in a room of people who knew me better than they ever cared to. The public erasure was finally complete. Linda tried to push past a server to reach me, her voice shrill and desperate. "Sienna, what is the meaning of this? I am your mother." The music was loud, but my silence was louder. I didn't even turn my head to acknowledge her existence. I just kept smiling at Leo, who squeezed my hand tightly under the white tablecloth. Security moved in instantly, not with force, but with a firm, professional presence that made the Reeds look even more out of place. "Ma'am, you are not on the seating chart," the guard said, his voice echoing in a slight lull of the music. "Please return to the standing area or you will be asked to leave the premises immediately." Seeing the woman who once told me I wasn't worth a Thanksgiving dinner being told she wasn't worth a chair was pure poetic justice. They were finally the ones being excluded. Clara stood up to give her toast, the gold embroidery on her designer dress shimmering under the chandeliers. She raised her crystal flute, her eyes scanning the room until they landed, briefly and coldly, on the Reeds at the back. "Family isn't a matter of biology," she began, her voice steady and powerful. "It's a matter of showing up. It's about who stays when the weather gets rough, not who expects a seat when the sun is finally shining." She turned to me, her expression softening into pure maternal love. "Sienna, from the moment you sat at our table 3 years ago, you weren't a guest. You were ours. We didn't give you life, but we sure as hell gave you a home." The room broke into a standing ovation. I looked at the back of the hall and saw my biological mother crying, but for once, her tears didn't make me feel guilty. The Reeds tried to make one last stand during the cake cutting. Robert, my biological father, managed to intercept me as I headed toward the powder room. "Sienna, stop this nonsense," he hissed, his eyes darting around to see who was watching. "You've had your fun, you've made your point. Now introduce us to your new in-laws so we can salvage some dignity and enjoy the party." I stopped and looked at him, truly looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no longing, just a profound sense of boredom. "Dignity?" I asked, tilting my head. "You lost that when you told me Brianna's comfort was worth my existence. You aren't here to salvage anything, Robert. You're here because you realized the Montgomerys are wealthy and you want a piece of the pie. But the kitchen is officially closed to you." "You're my daughter," he stammered, his face turning a deep, ugly shade of purple. "You can't just talk to me like that." I reached into my small bridal clutch and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a high-quality copy of the adult adoption decree. I handed it to him with a steady hand. "Actually, Robert, according to the state of Illinois, I am not. I am legally the daughter of Julian and Clara Montgomery. My birth certificate was amended 6 months ago. You are, legally speaking, a total stranger to me." He stared at the document, his hands trembling as he read the cold, hard legal seals. The look of defeat in his eyes was absolute.